Most of you know that I spent more than half of my life in New York City. And although I've lost the accent quite a while ago, every once in a while it pops up. For example, last night I was having dinner at Mark Zancanaro's house, and Mark's husband, Peter, is like me, is an Italian from New York. So we were saying after dinner, anybody want some coffee? And Greg says when I am on the phone with my family in New York, then my accent comes back out. It becomes really clear. So I thought to myself, if I was reading today's gospel in my New York accent, it would go something like this. Jesus said, "Yous are the branches, and I am divine." And I like that because divine and the vine. The word divine is of the vine. And divine is one of my favorite terms for God. I like calling God the divine because it's not masculine or feminine. And I like all the parts of speech of divine. I love the noun form. I love the adjective form. Like when you have a dessert and you go, oh, this is divine. It's like so amazingly good. And that's what God is. And then divine could also be a verb. So someone can divine something. It's to have the gift of divination, to intuit something, to discover something by intuition or through your inner wisdom. And to me, that's what God is too. But divine means of the vine. And we know in Italian that vino isn't vine, but wine. That's the fruit of the vine. Now, growing up in an Italian household, we had wine on the table every night for dinner. So wine was always a big part of my life, and if you've been out with me socially, you know it still is a big part of my life. And I love that it comes from nature, it comes from grapes, and it makes us feel divine. In many ways, we're transformed by it. Wine was a big part of Jesus' life. We know the very, very first miracle that Jesus ever performed was he turned water into wine. He took something ordinary and he was able to transform it into something extraordinary. And then we know his very, very last meal, the Last Supper he shared with his friends, he took wine and he shared it with them. And he said to them, "This wine is my blood." And as I say every Sunday when I'm preparing communion, I say this is Jesus' life force, his energy that circulates through his body. And now it circulates through you too. So wine is very, very important to Jesus as a symbol of that energy, of that flow. And that's what we're talking about today, is being in the flow of the divine, being connected with the vine. I love this analogy of us being the branches and God being the vine. Jesus often in his teachings used nature to explain things to people because it was easier for them to understand. Now, last Sunday, if you were here, you know Jesus explained, "I am the shepherd and you are the sheep." That beautiful relationship. But this week he goes even further. It's much more intimate. If you've ever seen a grapevine, you know that it's all intertwined. It's hard to tell like where one branch begins and another one ends. It's that we're all connected to each other and we're all connected to God. It's such a beautiful, intimate relationship. We're not separate from God. We're actually connected to God. And what flows through God, what flows through the vine, flows into us too. That's a very, very powerful thing. And I love that in our words of integration, that's what Richard Rohr was saying. Was that that's how you bear the fruits. That's what Christianity is all about, is remembering your connection to the divine and allowing it to flow through you. So it's very, very intimate. Jesus said, God is in me, I am in you, we're all in each other, okay? We're all one. And that's a very important and beautiful thing for us to remember. Now, again, growing up and spending most of my life in New York City, I don't know a lot about nature, but what I do know is that a seed is not to remain a seed. The purpose of a seed is to grow and to become something else, not to remain in that little shell. And it's the same thing for us and our purpose. We are not to remain in this human shell. We have a purpose, and we have been implanted with the God seed. We are sons and daughters of God, which means the seed of God is in us, and our purpose is to grow God, if you will, to produce God into the world. If we don't do that, we're not living out our purpose. And I think that's why so many people feel like they're living purposeless lives. Some people aren't feeling the flow of the divine in them. They look at their lives and they're not seeing much good fruit. And they're wondering, well, if I'm connected to the vine, how come I'm not feeling any of this? Well, I think the biggest problem is that most of us don't take the time to do any spiritual pruning, like Jesus talks about in today's gospel, pruning. Now, to prune is a scary thing. If you're a gardener, pruning means you're actually cutting off a part of the plant. And you're oftentimes not really sure, like, should I cut this off? Is this like a good branch or not? I'm not really sure. So most of us are afraid to do cutting in our being, in our lives. But pruning is necessary for the health of a plant. When you prune a plant, you are allowing it to produce more abundantly, to grow more fully. When you get rid of those branches that have already served their purpose, then the flow from the vine is strengthened. So I'm asking you today, what are those branches in your being that already serve their purpose? Can you cut them? Can you let them go? Can you release them? Because maybe that is what's draining your flow, and why you're not seeing abundance, and why you're not seeing the divine flow happening in your life. So for example, maybe those branches are fear and worry and anxiety. Maybe they're thoughts of being unworthy. You need to let those go. Maybe the dead branches you need to cut are a relationship or a job that isn't serving you anymore. It may be a grudge you're holding, something that you've been having trouble forgiving. You have to let that go so that more of the divine flow can flow through the vine and into your being. That's what we're being asked to do. Now, I'd like you to think of a garden hose. The water is flowing through the hose. The spigot is turned on and the water's flowing through it, but the hose has a kink in it. So the water can't get through. This is true for many of us. We are always connected to the vine, to the divine. We can't not be connected to God. We are. And that flow is always turned on. But we kink the hose with our negative thinking, with our fears, with our worries, with our anxieties. Those block the flow of that life-giving water. So we must go about what it takes to cut those branches, to prune, and to unkink the hose. And in our words of integration this morning, it gave us some suggestions. Silence, solitude, spiritual reading. And the thing I liked most, it said, staying in constant contact with God. I really like that a lot. You know, our Muslim brothers and sisters take time to pray 5 times a day. And I often wonder about us, how often do we think of God throughout the day and our connection with God throughout the day? The front cover of our bulletin says, abiding in love. And abide, we hear in today's gospel. Now, the readings for this morning came from the most recent translation of the Bible, which is called The Message. I talked about it a few Sundays ago. It's really the one that I've been praying with mostly because it relates to and is translated in the way that we speak today. And if you notice, Jesus didn't say, abide in me. They translated abide into abode, into a home. So he says, make your home with me. And I love that image that I'm living with Jesus in the same house. We're residing together. And that helps me during the day when I forget my connection to God. I think to myself, am I living in this moment with God, or am I not in that dwelling space? Someone once said to me, a good way to remember your connection is every time you're at a stop sign, like when you're driving and you get to a stop sign, every time you stop, just think, okay, am I connected with God in this moment? Am I thinking of God, or am I worried about something else? Am I thinking about something else? Or when you get to a red light. And then someone else said the other day, you know, we hear all these beeps now with our own phones and people's phones, whether you've got a text or a Facebook message or something. Well, someone said every time you hear a beep, just, again, remind yourself, am I connected to God? Am I living with God right now? Am I feeling the flow? Those are all good things to keep us reminded of God, to keep us in constant contact with God. Sometimes people talk to me about digital prompts, which are when you look at the digital clock and it'll say 1111 or something like that, and it reminds them of God, of staying connected to God. Whatever it takes for you, make sure that you become more conscious in your life of staying connected to God throughout the day, because that's going to open up the flow of the divine into your life. So what I'd like to ask us to do is I'd like to ask us this week to become more mindful. You hear that a lot with our Buddhist brothers and sisters. They talk about mindfulness. But that's what mindfulness means. It means really paying attention to being in the present moment and experiencing God. So I'd like us to be mindful multiple times throughout our day and ask ourselves, am I dwelling in this moment with God? Am I feeling the connection to the vine? When we start to do that, we allow more of the flow to work through us. And when we do that, then our lives begin to bear good fruit, which is the fruit of God. Namaste.